Welcome everybody to probably, well, there have been so many highlights already. We have to pinch ourselves about how truly meaningful, satisfying, exhilarating the Bar Association's 37th annual has been so far. We started 37 years ago, and I have to say, looking out at the audience, more of you are younger than the Bar Association than the Bar Association itself. That's really, really good news. From day one in 1989, even though the Republic of Armenia had not yet declared its independence, freedom was in the air. Freedom was in the air in 1989. I switched it off. Bring it closer. As I was saying already, the ripples of hope had already started to propagate and to multiply in our homeland. From that first day that the Bar Association was established in 1989, it's the Armenian Bar Association that has been the load-bearing truss of the bridge that connects us to our hiding. It's been a relationship of give and take. It's been a relationship of love and loyalty, and sometimes it's tough love. Tough love requires honesty, transparency, that there be no mistake. The Bar Association is among the most committed of organizations to both the Republic and, as I said, to the Armenian nation. That's something to keep in mind, that we as Armenians belong to the Armenian nation first and foremost. And for those of you who've been lucky enough to have connections with or have been born in the Republic of Armenia, that's a double achievement. So tough love. Tough love is something that our specialist Philippe Kalfayan from Paris, who's been an involved activist since the 1980s, an exemplary international human rights scholar and lawyer and writer. If you haven't read his works, please Google Philippe Kalfayan. You'll see how he regularly appears in the Armenian Mirror Spectator. And he does not pull any punches, because we cannot afford to these days. When we lose the very essence of who we are, and that is Artsakh, that is cultural heritage, that is fending our efforts to try to have an outside actor change our constitution because it has a reference to Artsakh. These are things that cannot be swept under the rug and just say that we're all going to get along with the administration in the Republic of Armenia, whoever it may be. Leah Whitson, the other bookend here, an anchor, she too has been involved for all of her professional life, giving up not the golden handcuffs, but pretty darn close to it. After graduating at the top of her classes at UC Berkeley and Harvard Law School, she went, like many of us did, for what we thought was going to be a meaningful career, and that is big law. She found out and acted on earlier than most of us that that's not it. It is something else. She's dedicated the last 25 plus years to that more meaningful engagement with society as a whole and with the Armenian experience in particular. Leah sits on the board of the Armenian Bar Association and several other groups. What brought Philippe, Rafi, and Leah together were the elections that just took place less than 1 week ago in the Republic, and they are part of an independent ad hoc organization called the International Observatory for Democracy in Armenia. And they made a handful of trips months before the election last week so that they could be our eyes and ears as to what happened, what went wrong, what went right. We thought that it would be most timely to hear from them directly. Unfortunately, our time slot is limited. Their introductions would take already more than half an hour, so let me just jump to Sarah Lee to make a presentation. Rafi, you'll make a presentation, and then we will go almost immediately into question and answer.
Thanks. Okay, I'll do that one. Thanks. Thanks to the Armenian Bar Association for focusing on this subject that I've only recently come to realize is a lightning rod in the Armenian community, not just the Armenian citizens of Armenia, but the Armenian diaspora. And it's really been a reminder for me about how greatly Armenians in the diaspora feel about what's happening in Armenia, how personal it feels to them, even though it's thousands of miles away. And it's really, I think, emblematic of our status as global citizens. As was just noted, Armenia held elections last week. The results are still not final, but the ruling party, the party of the Prime Minister, Civil Contract Party, Nikol Pashinyan's party, has a definitive majority sufficient to continue to control the government and parliament, but just under the supermajority that they need to amend the constitution, which of course the Prime Minister has promised to do as part of the peace agreement with Azerbaijan. You heard a little bit about that earlier. I won't go into the details here. What I will very quickly do is present the findings of IODA's first two investigative missions in Armenia, and then invite Philippe, who is far more expert on Armenia than I am, as someone who's been really spent decades working on deep in the weeds of democracy and human rights issues in Armenia and Artsakh, to talk about what these elections mean in the broader context, where we think things will go, what we have to watch out for, and sort of the most recent current developments specifically surrounding the elections that took place last week. As probably anyone who's been following the elections in Armenia know, it has been a very contentious one, but one with the rare advantage of having global attention that has little concern about the conditions inside Armenia, but a great deal of attention about who's going to win Armenia, because Armenia is the latest battleground for the contest between the West, i.e. the EU and the United States, and Russia. And Armenia has the unfortunate position of now being in the middle of that tug of war over who is going to have a zone of influence in Armenia. And so that external geopolitics has really dominated the international media attention focus on Armenia. There have been so many news articles examining, is Pashinyan going to shift more to Europe? Is he going to abandon Russia? And so forth. But our focus as IODA has been on what's happening on the ground in Armenia and the actual democratic conditions that are necessary for a fair and free election. So we have not engaged on the issues of whether or not the trip is a good idea, whether or not the peace agreement with Azerbaijan is a good idea or a bad idea. We focused on whether the government of the Republic of Armenia has respected the human rights of the people who live in Armenia. And I must say, you know, because to my surprise, I've been now accused of being a Russian agent and an ally of Putin. You know, I went into these elections as a fan of Prime Minister Pashinyan. I imagine many of you shared in our joy when the Velvet Revolution took place, when Pashinyan came in promising democracy, promising end to corruption, and this is someone who I put a tremendous amount of faith in. And so if anything, I felt like I came in biased to be pro-government. But human rights investigators have an uncanny ability to find what's actually happening on the ground. And perhaps more to my surprise than Philippe's, because he's been covering Armenia and investigating conditions in Armenia as long as I have, I was very disappointed. We were very disappointed to discover that there has been and continues to be a pretty significant deterioration of democratic rights and freedoms in the country. And that is, a function of power. It's a function of the fact that the ruling party has such a vast majority in the parliament that it can pass any law it wants, that it can direct the justice ministry and the security forces to act as they wish. And, nothing corrupts like power. And so that sense of having absolute power has pushed the government, has caused the government to carry out numerous excesses against political opposition members, starting with arrests of the head of the leading opposition party, Samuel Karapetyan, but also in attacks against members of the Armenian church. A number of Armenian bishops remain under arrest. The Gatholikos, head of the Armenian church, is travel banned, and Pashinyan has promised to remove him from power, claiming that he's not following the canonical rules and so forth in what we see as a serious violation of religious freedom and separation of church and state in Armenia. The arrests that have been taking place over the last few months have not only targeted members of political opposition, but they've also targeted critics of the government, journalists, bloggers, even ordinary citizens who dared to criticize the prime minister have found themselves arrested, imprisoned, and charged with absurd charges like attempting to overthrow the government, or the catch-all hooliganism, which is an actual provision of the Armenian Penal Code, and has basically seen the government weaponize the judiciary to target critics of the government. That, of course, is something that undermines the political freedom in which the elections can take place. I won't go into the details of all of the ordinary Armenian citizens who found themselves arrested after verbal altercations with the Prime Minister himself. I need to focus on how to do our do not disturb here. So, okay. One of the things that we did focus on in our investigations was this effort not only to weaponize the judiciary by the ruling party, but to interfere in the independence of the judiciary, including through the Supreme Judicial Council, which has resulted in the summary dismissal of several judges on politically motivated grounds, and clear suggestions of political bias in the appointment of judges to hear cases involving political opponents. I mentioned the abuse of the vague provisions of the Penal Code. Classic 101 dictator mode is to use these provisions of the Penal Code to arrest critics, but also notably, and this is something that we really took away from our second investigation when we left Yerevan and we went into cities and towns and villages across the country, was the atmosphere of political polarization and fear among voters. Numerous civil society representatives, political party representatives we spoke to expressed fear that if they were seen associating with members of the political opposition, going to campaign rallies and so forth, that they would face repercussions, that they would be fired from their jobs, demoted from their jobs, particularly civil service employees. At the same time, we documented numerous cases of the government using state resources to advance its own political campaign. So for its own political rallies, students and teachers from universities, high schools, even grade schools would basically be forced to attend the ruling party's rallies and campaigns. And again, this is not the sort of thing that should happen in a democracy. Despite sort of the very concrete and specific details of these deteriorating democratic conditions in the country, arrests, prosecutions, weaponization of the judiciary, interference in the judiciary, the most prominent feature of the political debates appeared to revolve around these allegations of foreign influence, foreign allegiance, and voter manipulation. And there were, numerous allegations of covert campaigns to flood public spaces with pro or anti-government messages, And the election was happening in an atmosphere where the government was saying that if you vote for the opposition, we will go back to war with Azerbaijan. War will be the outcome. We examined some of the most serious allegations of foreign interference, particularly by Russia. The most prominent claim by the government and government media was that the Russian government was planning on sending 100,000 Armenian citizens of Russia, Armenian citizens who are living in Russia, to come to Armenia to vote for Sabra Garabetyan's party on sort of an all-expense-paid boondoggle facing intimidation. We were not able to find any evidence of this plot, but it appeared so prominently and regularly in the media that many people believed it to be true. I think had that plot been borne out to be true, we would have known about it by now. I don't think there's any evidence that even 1,000 Armenians flew in from Russia under, paid agents of the Russian government to vote for the opposition. But that was the atmosphere in which most conversations would take place, and a lot of the times even civil society groups would say, well, yes, these bad things are happening, but the other side are pro-Russian, the other side are agents of Russia, as if that would make it okay for the government to be arresting and prosecuting critics and so forth. There were also a great deal of allegations about the government's own AI, fake media, media manipulation campaigns, and leaked documents purporting to show a government plot to use nefarious means to sway the electorate to support it. We reviewed those documents as well and could not sort of assess their credibility or validity. But really just to emphasize that these elections are taking place almost entirely around issues that don't have to do with the performance of the government itself inside the country. Before I turn this over to Philippe to talk about the elections themselves and the outcomes and where we see things going, I did want to just take a moment to emphasize that, as members of the Armenian Bar Association, and I'm so happy to see so many young people attending this meeting and prior meetings, it just warms my heart. It means something, besides just networking here in the United States and seeking advantage for our own careers, and I want all of us to have advantage for our own careers. It also means that we feel like we belong to and identify with the Armenian people, and we want the Armenian people to succeed and have their rights and their freedoms, whether it's the political prisoners in Artsakh, whether it's the right of return of the displaced population of Artsakh, but also the citizens of Armenia. And we are a global community, and we have every right to critique the government of Armenia as anyone else. And so I would invite all of you to take responsibility for the rights and freedoms of Armenians everywhere around the world. And to remind ourselves that being part of the Armenian Bar Association is actually connected to our connection to the Armenian people. I'm going to pause.
Yeah, just before we go to Philip, or Rafi, I'd like to call him. It's not only a matter of being proud that we have a Sarah Lee and a Philippe Kalfayan as part of IODA. This fact-finding mission was mostly comprised, overwhelmingly, by non-Armenians. Non-Armenians who are steeped in this type of work and dedication and focus for their entire careers, from a former member of Canadian Parliament for 10 years, to a current professor at Princeton who headed Human Rights Watch for 30 years when Sarah Lee was also the head of the Middle East desk, to top practitioners in Great Britain and Spain and elsewhere. So it really is a broad array of spectrum of true specialists in the area with very little vulnerability to bias and accusations. One could readily accuse me, for example, of being biased. After all, the Armenian Bar Association, under Harry's chairmanship, we changed our governing document. Our governing document, we changed our mission statement, and that mission statement was modified and amended to say that we will we will spare no effort or expense to ensure that the Republic of Artsakh is independent, free, and recognized as so. So I, for example, can be accused that I have that bent on it in a current era when all of that seems to have evaporated. So before we go, now we'll go to Philippe very eloquently, and just know that this is a very, very special treat for us, insofar as he's had probably 40 years of direct experience in human rights in Armenia, and especially, and more, and most importantly, in Artsakh. Philippe?
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for these nice words. It's too much. It's too much for me. I'm not used to that. It's a great honor for me to take part to this panel. Sarah said most of the points that we should have raised. So I don't want to spend too much time, and so continuing on this aspect. I just want to say a few things about the current situation. So the outcome of the elections. So as you may have followed in the press, tomorrow at 6 p.m. Yerevan time, so the Central Electoral Commission will publish the final results. As of now, 3 parties have requested the cancellation of the whole elections. Strong Armenia from Kalfayan, Wings of Unity from Armen, and a third party. The third party actually didn't ask for cancellation of the election. They are intending to call upon the Constitutional Court, which is the highest en bloc. As you may also have noticed, 650 polling stations have seen their ballots recounted. This recounting ended yesterday evening, and after the recounting of the ballots, many numbers have moved up and down, but in the end, the Civil Contract Party succeeded in raising its total number of ballots. So the fourth party, which was supposed to enter the parliament, so Prosperous Armenia, from Gagik Zarukian, is still below the threshold of 4%. And at the same time, so Civil Contract Party, by raising its number of ballots validated by 1,348, has probably improved its percentage. So we don't know what the CEC, the Central Electoral Commission, will say tomorrow, especially because 2 precincts have seen the total election cancelled. So we don't know whether there will be a new election in 2 of these precincts. So that the decision is at the discretion of the Electoral Commission tomorrow. But in the current situation, considering what Sarah told you, the unfair conditions before the election, nobody knows what will be the situation tomorrow evening and the days following tomorrow. The only thing we are sure today is that the Civil Contract Party will not gain the 2/3 of the seats at the parliament. This is quite significant aspect because any constitutional amendment, any constitutional reform needs the 2/3 seats at the parliament. So at least there couldn't be any amendment to the constitution because the civil contract party has not get the majority to do it alone. But by having 3/5 of the seats, they can adopt any law they want. They can nominate any person they want at state agencies in the ministry or any judiciary position. So what they have done so far over the last 5 years. So this is still a lot of powers in the hands of the ruling party. So basically, this is what I can say today. There is a lot of uncertainty about what will happen next. Unfortunately, because as you said, I think this is Armen. This is correct. Yes, Armen said. I mean, we really need to behave as one nation, and that's why we are worried about the future. The external threats over Armenia are real, and they are not diminished. Everybody should have noticed Azerbaijan has not congratulated officially the Prime Minister of Armenia for the re-election. So this is a quite significant move or no move from them. They expect, in fact, a total victory of the Prime Minister party in this election. And so this is, in fact, at odds with the other countries' congratulations, including Turkey. So that means that Azerbaijan is still a very high threat to Armenia. And that's why this country needs more than ever national cohesion. So that's why this election should have been fair and free. And that's why we expect that this election reflects the reality of the votes. I will finish here, and I will expect some questions, of course. Thank you.
Thank you, Sir Lee. Thank you, Philippe. This guy, as I said, is jump right into your questions. Who wants the mic first?
Feels very odd as a non-lawyer in the room to ask the first question. And maybe this is incredibly naive, but what is the possibility of coalition amongst the political parties? Civil contract is about 60%. If they work with potentially one other party, would they not be able to get the capability to introduce the constitutional amendments?
That's the question I asked Philippe yesterday during our group conference call, and I was wondering what the answer was because I couldn't hear it because I was driving.
Okay. The parties which have not passed the threshold are not sitting in the parliament. So with whom the civil contract party could coalesce?
That's what we're asking you. Can they form a coalition with
whom? With whom?
I don't know.
I mean, yeah. I mean, there will be if Hayastan, so prosperous Armenia, does not enter the parliament, there will be two opposition party blocks. Strong Armenia and Hayastan. I mean, we know that these two blocks are against the modification of the constitution. So with whom civil contract party can make a coalition?
So that's a rhetorical
I mean,
question.
nobody.
Because the Prime Minister has put into jail the leaders of Strong Armenia and many of his supporters. The Prime Minister has, and this is factual, put into jail the leadership of the Armenia Alliance and its supporters, and has recently indicted the 3.997% Armenian leader, Mr. Zarukyan. So the dry humor shouldn't be lost on us. In other words, the answer is there's no one to make a coalition with, I think is the answer.
My question has to do with the grounds for maintaining that the elections were, rigged or did not reflect the will of the Armenian people. I think and correct me if I'm wrong, but the observers that were present and observed the election, including the observers from the Commonwealth of Independent States, none of them have said anything that would have implied that the elections were conducted in violation of the rules, or there were, outright vote rigging, and that stuff. And obviously, the Prime Minister's party is less popular now after the war and all of the, incompetence that they've shown over the course of the past several years. But the question remains: were there really any legitimate violations, or can we just say that the Prime Minister is more popular than a combination of opposition consisting of a convicted rapist, a former murderous president, and a Russian oligarch sent to subvert Armenia's independence?
And therein lies the diversity of the Armenian Bar Association.
No, I think that's a good question. I should clarify further. So, organizations that monitored the elections on election day, you're right, concluded that it was a fair and free election from the technical perspective of casting ballots. Polling stations, there was no sort of ballot stuffing or ballot disappearances on any significant scale. But that's not what makes a fair and free election. And the reason why we conducted our investigative missions in the months before the election, and this is work, of course, that I've done in dozens of countries around the world, is because we were examining the political environment in which elections take place. So you could have an election in Syria where the former President Assad would get 95% of the ballots, and there would not be one stolen ballot, right? But it's meaningless to have a technically clean election if the political opposition can't fairly contest it. And so what our investigations found was that the government was breaching its human rights obligations by bringing politically motivated charges against political opposition members, critics of the government, and journalists, creating a very hostile environment for members of the political opposition, and eroding democracy and democratic freedoms in the country. Now, you may hear all of these facts and say, well, I would still vote for Pashinyan. That's fine. That's of no interest to me, and that's not the focus of our investigative mission. We're not there to say this candidate or that candidate should win. We're not there to document potential abuses by members of political opposition or journalists. We are there on a human rights investigation, and only the government has human rights responsibilities. Only the government is tasked, has an obligation to uphold the human rights of the people living in Armenia. So the focus of our investigation was exclusively on the conduct of the government and the extent to which it was respecting the rights of Armenian citizens for an open political environment, for free political contest. And I wouldn't go so far as to say that the elections were unfair or unfree, and that's very black and white, but even the OSCE in its report did raise a lot of these issues of arrests of critics and the arrests of the government. And what I can tell you as someone who's worked in this space for so long is this is how democracy is lost. The minute you start telling yourself, well, but the other side, and therefore I'm not going to criticize the side in power, that's when a government starts sliding into dictatorship. That's what the slide into authoritarianism looks like. I've seen this movie before in many, many countries, where a country that was pretty democratic, drip, 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 slides into autocracy. And that's the danger I see in Armenia. The fact is, Armenia is a landlocked country. We are not like Azerbaijan, we're not a petro-rich state. The only real asset Armenia has is its democracy. The only thing that distinguishes Armenia from the countries surrounding it is its democracy. And that's why we have to all, as global Armenians, treat it as the most prized possession of the Armenian nation, that we all have a responsibility to preserve and protect and fight for, even if we want to vote for Pashinyan.
Yeah, may I add something? Yeah.
Yes.
Yes, just to respond, even if Sarah has already started to respond, the OSCE long-term observation team has shared a total view, with us. They have expressed exactly the same worry about the pre-election conditions and atmosphere. And when the journalists, during the press conference, asked them, do you consider these elections are as fair and free? They didn't respond to the question. But indeed, the MPs from the European Parliament or from CIS, in fact, didn't challenge the fairness of the elections. So you can see the difference between people who are doing a technical observation, like our observatory, by the way, and the politicians. That's why independent observation based on human rights law, on international law, are so critical for such elections. The European MPs had absolutely no balance in what they said. And even in what they did before the elections, since they endorsed one candidate during the pre-election campaign. So again, we have to be very cautious when we say CIS people said. CIS people were MPs and not a long-term observation team.
I wanted to ask about to the extent Western governments, the U.S. and European, intelligence communities sort of were echoing some of the narratives about Russian disinformation. In particular, I know there was that one Reuters article that cited a bunch of anonymous U.S. intelligence sources backing up the narrative. And sort of the implication is that, assuming the reporting is accurately quoting them, that the U.S. government is sort of actively supporting some of the narratives, problematic narratives that you were describing. And I was sort of wondering, how do you address that at the U.S. government level? Today, for example, we were hearing a lot about how the Armenian community can engage with the U.S. government at different levels, but sort of on sort of this access and on this issue, how do you think about U.S. government engagement on these issues?
Before one of our panelists answers that, I don't know if we keep on putting this off. Last I remember, it was the President of the United States, who lives 2 blocks away, and his Vice President, who lives not too far away, who actually explicitly endorsed and repeated their endorsements for the civil contract party leader. Last I remember, the evil empire, Putin or China, I don't know. I don't remember them endorsing anyone in the opposition. So if we're talking about manipulation and foreign influences in Armenia's elections, we better really look at the facts pretty straightly. and maybe there's a good reason why Trump and Vance wanted to do that. They're claiming credit for, at least in part, Pashinyan's victory. But go back to what the question was.
The allegations of foreign interference, manipulation, as I mentioned, dominated the elections. And of course, we all saw the Reuters article with 5 unnamed intelligence sources claiming that Russia was running a massive misinformation campaign. And it's certainly something that I know Russia is capable of and has done in other countries and so forth. We saw the evidence of one leaked document, which was the basis of a lot of the domestic Armenian media's claims about Russian interference. And the second big claim was the plot to send 100,000 Armenians into Russia. We couldn't assess the credibility, evaluate whether or not this is credible information. We certainly don't take Western intelligence officials as credible sources. And I wouldn't take those as sources anywhere on any issue where the country they're commenting on is their nemesis, right? I mean, if they were talking about France interfering, then maybe you would take it as a credible claim. So it was really hard to assess. I would say that the election no doubt had, and I've seen some of these fake AI-generated videos targeting the government. There was an AI-generated video of the Prime Minister's spokeswoman accusing him of rape, and others. It was a completely AI-generated video. So no doubt that this misinformation campaign was happening. Was Russia specifically behind it or paying for it? I have no evidence to show that. I don't think we've seen any concrete evidence to show that. Possible. But there was, every reason to believe that the political parties, including the ruling party, were engaging in that kind of social media manipulation, fake media manipulation within the country. As Armen was just noting, what is clear, what there is abundant evidence of, is direct interference by Western government officials by publicly endorsing a contender for the prime ministership, Nikol Pashinyan. It wasn't just Trump, it wasn't just J.D. Vance. Macron made the same endorsement. The British government came very close to an endorsement. The EU had its mega summit, the European Community Summit in Yerevan for the first time, even though Armenia is not in the EU, just before the elections. Marco Rubio showed up just days before the elections to sign all of these agreements promising all of these things for Armenia right before the elections. So, all of that is tremendously unfortunate because in terms of our advocacy with the EU governments and the United States, we haven't had any direct advocacy with the US administration yet. We keep trying. With the Europeans we have. Unfortunately, their focus is 100% on winning Armenia away from Russia. And if that happens as a result of, an unfair and unfree election in Armenia, that's okay. That's just not a priority for them. And that's the problem. That's what we're trying to address. We're saying don't just treat this as a political prize in a contest that has nothing to do with the Armenian people. If you care about Armenia, if you care about a successful, stable country in the Caucasus, support democracy and scold the government. But that hasn't happened.
Alex has what will be either the last or the second to last question. But before Alex, Philippe, do you want to weigh in on that?
No.
Okay, go ahead, Alex.
But very briefly, Ms. Whitson, in all of your experiences doing this in many countries, is it good or bad for democracy when elections become exclusively geopoliticized, meaning exclusively about a country's future geopolitical orientation?
I mean, it's definitely bad when it becomes exclusively that. And, probably Philippe will not fully agree with me, but, there are many ways in which the government inside the country appears to have delivered on a number of economic fronts. Yerevan is buzzing. The roads, schools, There's, a lot of public spending going on. The pensions have been raised for civil service employees, very popular moves. And from all the many years I've been traveling to Armenia, I've never seen Yerevan humming and buzzing. I mean, Beirut is finished, it's now Yerevan, really. So I see that there will be a lot of things that people will, find positive in what the government is doing that affects them and their lives. And I also recognize that, unfortunately for Armenians, we don't have the luxury of saying, okay, we don't care about the geopolitics, right? Because it's an existential threat that we're surrounded by. I imagine, my own personal point of view is that the best option for Armenia is to have good relations with all of its neighbors. It does not have the luxury of choosing sides and snubbing one country or another. And unfortunately, that seems to be the tactic that Pashinyan was playing, but I know others feel that that was just a ploy, that in fact he's going to continue the balancing act. So I don't know, that's beyond my knowledge base.
Just a
Counterpoint, Philip, please.
No comment.
just maybe I should know the answer to this. If you're an Armenian national and you're traveling or you're on vacation, are you able to participate in a vote, like an absentee vote that we would be able to do here in the United States?
No, I thought that you had to travel to Armenia, but someone told me I was wrong, so.
Does one need to be physically present in Armenia to vote?
Yes, absolutely.
Many countries allow their nationals to go to their embassies to vote. Armenia does not have that flexibility at the current time, other than diplomats.
Actually, it's interesting because you have to look at the Moldovan case, because in Moldova, that's the Moldovan diaspora who made reverse the power in Moldova. So they have succeeded to bring the voters from the diaspora to vote remotely for the change of government.
Last question.
Since I have the mic. First of all, thank you. I think the most engaging and the most timely discussion that we've had today. What can we as lawyers, of course primarily, but secondarily as people, Armenian Americans with connections to Armenia, with friends, perhaps relatives in Armenia, some of us may be dual citizens, what can we do to help facilitate free and fair elections or counteract disinformation campaigns, AI, and false narratives and things like that, whether as attorneys or just as people trying to raise awareness?
Well, I couldn't comment on how to counter AI and all of that. I mean, that's way, again, beyond my technical knowledge and understanding. But as members of the Armenian Bar Association, I think we have a very important role to play. At minimum, and I think this is something the Bar Association has done really, really well, to protect lawyers and the judiciary and the rule of law in Armenia. That to me is as important as protecting the rule of law here in the United States or in Canada or many of the other places where Armenians live. And I think that the Armenian Rights Committee and more broadly the Bar Association has intervened. There's obviously a lot more we could do to have regular monitoring, put out regular statements, seek out meetings with the Armenian government representatives here in the United States, in Canada, and France, to raise our concerns publicly and be part of the conversation and part of the dialogue. I welcome another Armenian Bar Association meeting in Armenia, and I'm going to be advocating for that. There is nothing like facts on the ground. There's no substitute for being on the ground. And it matters to civil society in Armenia to see the Armenian people engaged with them and with their interests in mind, as opposed to relationships with the government as if they are truly a proxy for the people.
Well, thank you very much. I have to say, Philip and Sarah Lee, I second Brian's statement. I'll leave you with this. Nobody should mistake our pushing and prodding for truth and transparency and accountability as somehow being reflexive armchair critics of any government, including this one. As I started, our love and loyalty is overarching and transcends the sitting government's 5 years or 15 years. This organization already, as I said, is older than the Republic of Armenia, and we have stood the test of that time. And perhaps it's because we love so much the country. Perhaps it's because we love the people so much that we have to hold ourselves accountable to a higher standard. 10 years, 11 years ago, there were 166,000 people filling the streets of Los Angeles on the centennial of the Armenian genocide. I was there 2 months ago, and the same place, and there were 3,000. Where have all the people gone? We don't have to ask ourselves that very haunting, or that question that has a haunting answer, because most of us have stayed intact, in place, and you see the young faces here, who are proof positive that our meaning and commitment to ourselves and our communities is a very long-term project. It's precisely because of these differing views that find a coalescence in a place that welcomes all thoughts and all types of people, that we're truly, truly appreciative of all of you, and especially all of those the veterans who have been here for going on for 4 decades. I'd like to recognize the 2 in particular, in the back 3 in particular. Sonia Nersessian, I don't know if you've been recognized. She's a former chair. Can you stand up, please? Philippe Darmanian is a heroine exemplar of the Armenian Bar Association. Lisa Marshumian, who is there, is also a former Harry Buchanan, also not only a former chair, but really the definition of everything that makes a good Armenian Bar Association member, which is the thing I think that makes a good Armenian. So did I miss anybody?